1. Growing up in a Christian household, I knew the battle between good and evil existed in our world, whether we saw it or not. Going to church and Sunday school every week, I was taught about the Word of God and how He wants us to live. But in Sunday school, I was never taught that my faith would make me a target for several demonic spirits that would eventually attack me and my family for 3 years of my childhood. What started as an evil spirit attaching itself to me eventually culminated into 2 separate events. The first event is a situation that won't be included in this story, or I'd have to cram it. I'll try to make the retelling of my story as quickly as I can, but the basic gist of the first event was a situation where the entity that followed me everywhere ended up physically attacking several of my classmates at my friend's birthday party. The second event being at my church, where my sister was maliciously attacked by an unseen force, and she was pinned to the floor by members of our church as they prayed over in a large group. That I will explain, for it was the event that ended a series of intense spiritual battles that overtook my family's life. In 2014, my family, along with 11-year-old me, resided in Tucson, Arizona for a job opportunity my father was given to start a new business. Our original home is in Colorado, where I was born and raised. We needed a scene change in our lives, so we left the Rocky Mountains and landed in the desert. Needless to say, I never got used to the number of cacti I saw wherever I turned. Come spring break, my family took a trip to Avondale, Colorado to visit my cousins. The house my cousins stayed in was quite literally in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by nothing but open fields and corn stalks. The nearest neighboring house was a half-mile down the dirt road. As if my cousin's house wasn't creepy enough, it was so far out in the country that nighttime was especially dark. I always remembered having an uneasy feeling about the property itself. Don't get me wrong, it's a beautiful house, not to mention its huge size. It has 2 floors, including a basement and a modern layout with a cement exterior. The house was so big and so isolated you'd be able to see the house driving several miles away. My cousins were the only family to have lived on the property, so any possible deaths on the land was out of the question. The house my cousins lived in had no conceptual reasoning to be as creepy as it was. It wasn't until one night my cousins and I were about to go to bed. My cousin Savannah told me why she didn't like sleeping in her room at night. Every few nights she would see a little girl standing on the edge of her bed and stare at her. Just the thought of that scared the shit out of me, and I couldn't blame her for not wanting to sleep in her room. As a matter of fact, Savannah had taken the opportunity to sleep in the living room while we were visiting. Me, Savannah, and her friend Taylor huddled up in the living room and treated it as a fun little sleepover. When Savannah told us she was seeing that little girl, we ended up staying on the topic of scary stories. This was when Taylor told the story of Courtner Road, a story that would soon become very personal to my life. Courtner Road is an actual road that sat about 10 minutes away from the house, where a legend spreads that a man went crazy in the house he lived in with his family. The old man savagely murdered his whole family. He was so out of his mind he hung his daughter's body on a tree branch that hangs over Courtner Road, so everyone who drove past could see it. In a fit of rage, the old man lit his house on fire, and now all that remains on the property is the outline of the destroyed walls in the basement. Taylor and Savannah told me they had both gone to the property at some point, and confirmed that all that's left standing are the remains of the fire that burned the house down. At some point, I asked if anything had happened to them when they had went to the property, and they responded with a list of things that people they knew had experienced in the past when they went. Things like still seeing the little girl in the pink dress hanging in the tree her father tied her to, or seeing the family's white dog chasing you away from the property. But the worst one for me was seeing a tall man in a black cloak that showed itself to the people that visited, and continued to haunt them in the future. But knowing these were just stories to freak me out, I passed them off. Eventually we stopped freaking each other out and fell asleep. Savannah and Taylor slept on the only 2 couches in the living room, leaving me to sleep on the carpet floor with a blanket and pillow in front of the couch Savannah was laying on. Around 12 in the morning, I had woken up from a heavy sleep. Everyone else was sleeping as well, Savannah snoring and Taylor stretched across the couch in a way that's sure to give her back problems when she wakes up in the morning. I sat up from the floor and peered into the kitchen to look at the time on the oven. Sure enough, It was only a few minutes past 12. I looked around the house as I sat on the floor wide awake. The weirdest part is that I didn't even feel uneasy or that someone was watching me. It wasn't until I looked toward the foyer and saw him standing there. My heart sank to my stomach as my brain connected the dots. Standing in the center of the foyer, in front of the main entrance, was the figure of the tallest man I've ever seen in my life, abnormally tall. He was so tall he was hunching over and stared directly at the floor. I was unable to see his facial features as he continued to stare at the ground. I even contemplated if my mind was making up what I was seeing. But the more I stared at him, the more real he became. His entire body was covered in black, with a hood that sagged over his head, almost as if he was the perfect embodiment of the Grim Reaper. His clothing made him look almost cartoonish, and his hands at his side as he continued to stare directly at the floor. When it became clear that's what I was staring at, a coldness flowed through with a sensation as if the blood in my veins had turned to ice. I quickly tucked my head under the covers, hoping that whatever it was standing there didn't notice I saw it. But it became clear that it was an attack towards me. The voice of a man spoke through the blanket and into my ears, as if his lips were speaking directly above my head, speaking in a language that sounded like gibberish. I couldn't understand what he was saying, but I knew in my heart that his intent was to hurt me. I could feel it. It took strength out of me to snap out of it and scream for Savannah to wake up. Several times I screamed for her, each time getting louder and more urgent. By the third time I shouted, the voice above me had stopped, and I heard Savannah's groggy voice asking what I needed. I quickly hopped onto the couch beside her and cried as I told her and Taylor what had just happened to me. I didn't leave the couch for the whole night, and I didn't even go back to sleep. I sat in shock and fear watching television, waiting for the sun to come up. I didn't experience anything supernatural again until we had gone back to Arizona. To sum up the next few months of my life, I began needing to have white noise playing while I was asleep, or I'd hear the voice of the tall man call my name over and over again. I also slept with my closet light on because I was scared of being surrounded by complete darkness in the circumstance I saw the tall man again. The worst nights were when I'd wake up and feel my bed mattress vibrating and breathing. For years, the entity continued to make its presence known, not only at night, but even throughout the day. Daytime was when I noticed the shadow figures running around my house. I had confirmation that I wasn't just making it up because my dog Harley would react to what I was seeing, either by growling at the figures or following them where they'd run off to. Flash forward about a year later, and my mom and dad had decided to get a divorce. My mom took me and my sister Jessica back to Colorado, where all of our family reside. This time we moved to Colorado Springs and stayed with a family friend until we had enough money to get a place for us to stay. By this point, my sister had been tested and diagnosed with PNES, post-non-epileptic seizures, a mental illness that the spirits that followed me would soon take advantage of and target my sister. Being extremely financially unstable, not knowing if we would find a place to live, while battling my father in court for the custody of me and Jessica, my mother had a lot on her plate. And that was the perfect opportunity for the entity to strike. What started out as convulsions, Jessica's seizures soon turned violent. When Jessica had an episode, she began screaming for help and crying in agony. There was pain on her face. Jessica would explain to our mother that during these episodes, she would see several shadow figures surrounding her, holding her down, and whispering horrendous words that threatened her. Jessica was being oppressed by several demonic spirits, and her mental health took a toll. At the age of 16, Jessica had attempted suicide more than once, and her doctor was convinced she was showing signs of schizophrenia. She was eventually sent to several different psychiatric hospitals throughout the next few months. In the short amount of time we'd have Jessica home with us, we would attempt to go to church every Sunday, but as expected, Jessica's episodes would become more intense and violent than ever. Her episodes got so bad we would need to leave halfway through the service. My mom, desperate for help, would cry on the way back home. The grace of going to church had been stripped from us. My sister was persistent to try to return to church as much as she could, But the day that all hell broke loose was when Jessica stayed for an entire service. When the service had ended, Jessica almost immediately collapsed on the floor and slipped into another episode. A member of our church and close family friend, Wayne, had quickly run to Jessica on the floor to help her. Wayne wasn't prepared when an unseen force had attacked my sister as she lay in his arms. Jessica screamed the most painful and blood-curdling scream I've ever heard, a scream that I will never forget. She was sobbing for someone to help her. The attention of a group of church members quickly rushed over to Jessica and saw what was happening to her. It didn't take them long to surround Jessica like a swarm of bees, place their hands on her, and pray in a powerful way I've never seen before. Several church members began speaking in tongues, holding her to the floor as Jessica wailed and struggled to push them off of her. This episode continued for at least 10 minutes before Jessica had become unconscious and lay limp in Wayne's arms. A few minutes more praying went by, and Jessica had finally regained consciousness. She cried about what had happened. She was embarrassed. But most of all, she was crying tears of joy that their prayer had stopped the attack on her. That was the last time Jessica's seizures were like that. She still has seizures to this day, but they've transitioned back to the convulsions she had when they first started. And eventually, so did the experiences that pursued onto me at night. It wasn't until recently, when I was talking to my mother about my experiences as a child, when I realized that they had stopped the day Jessica's last episode in the church. That's when I knew it was important for me to tell this story, for people to understand that evil in this world exists, and how serious of an issue it is. Over the last few years, I've researched as much as I could to gain an understanding of the events that occurred in my life. I had stumbled upon the Courtner Road story several times in articles, and the legend stays the same, but with more research, I found out the real story of what happened on Courtner Road. The tale everyone hears now was made during the era of the satanic panic of the 1970s and 80s. A man who actually knew the family on Courtner Road personally made a statement that the old man and his wife died in the house due to natural causes in the 60s, and their children are alive and well to this day. The rumors and stories of the old man killing his family led to trespassers on the property, where they'd conjure up the spirits of what they thought was the family that died there. When this caught wind, the house was set on fire and destroyed to stop people from sneaking onto the property and the things they were doing there. Finding this information has only made me wearier of what haunts the property of Courtner Road. I've never been on the property before, but whatever it was gave recognition to the night I saw the tall man, followed and traumatized me for 3 years of my life. Whether it was what haunts the actual property or not, the entity manifested itself as the idea created in the minds of naive kids. We invited something we could not handle, and that is the message the world needs to hear. 2. Growing up, I was lucky enough to be born into a wealthy family of 4 at the time, with a brother and sister living in Australia. I don't remember any of the residence I was born into, but the second house we lived in was one I would never forget. My parents had purchased a massive old mansion. When I say old, I mean they had slave quarters built into the house. I believe my mom even has old black and white photos of the original owners in front of the house. After my parents purchased the property, they almost immediately started renovations. The first signs that something paranormal was going on with or in the house was when the builders told us so. We had multiple builders claim that the house was haunted. One painter refused to go back into the house, only saying it was haunted. The other builders, however, weren't as bothered. I distinctly remember one of them telling us he thought it was a very friendly haunting, so he did not mind working on the property at all. Fast forward to when renovations are almost finished, and we're living in the property. Although there were 5 of us living in the house, my brother even sleeping in the one-time slave quarters. Only my mom and myself experienced paranormal encounters. I remember countless sleepless nights laying in fear, covering my head with my blanket, wishing the nights away. Almost every night I would be visited by multiple paranormal things. I'm not sure what they were, and would love people's opinions, but the best way I can describe it is dark silhouettes. However, when they first appeared, there was a great shine of light. Our house was located near the airport, so we had multiple planes take off over the house. If it was dark, we would sometimes have some light from the planes shine into our house. But the light that was emitted when these silhouettes appeared was unlike any light I've experienced before. I was so scared of them, but looking back, I'm unsure if they emitted a frightened feeling or if it was just me being a young child. I was a terrible sleeper when I was young, often waking up bawling my eyes out. This was the most common time when I would be visited by the silhouettes. I remember I had a toy clown that had a sort of rounded bottom so you could push it, and it would bounce right back up. It had bells in it also. It wasn't a big toy, maybe 15 centimeters high in total. Often these silhouettes would tip this over to make it rock back and forth. Again, I was so frightened. Them just showing up was enough for me to hide under my blanket and not make a sound, forcing myself to stop crying. They would also often whisper my name over and over, but almost how you would call a dog's name to get his attention, in a very light, happy voice. Years later, when I discussed this with my mum, she saw what was happening from her room. My bedroom was situated in a way that she could see my door frame from her bed. She would hear me crying, and then see big bursts of light gradually building at my door, and suddenly disappear, and I would stop crying, again out of fear, mostly. She would also get chills and not be able to move while it was happening. She also experienced other things, such as hearing a child's voice, beckoning her to find them. When she was on the 3rd floor and we were all playing outside. This went on for years until we finally sold the property, which wasn't easy in itself when your 7-year-old is running around telling every potential buyer at the open house that the house is haunted, and they visit him every night. We did finally sell the property, and Mom even received a call from the new owners angrily stating that we should have disclosed that the house was haunted in this sale. Mom pretended she didn't know what he was talking about. As you can imagine, I was so excited to move into a new house and finally sleep relatively peacefully, especially because I was getting older and starting to understand I was experiencing hauntings of some kind. The house we moved into is another mansion, but this time decades newer. Later I found out this was at Mum's request. We bought brand TVs, couches, beds, everything for the new house. Except we brought my wardrobe. I only made the connection to the wardrobe after we finally got rid of it, and the hauntings stopped. In the meantime, things were even worse in the new house. I'm not sure if I was older, so I have a better memory of the time. I understood more of what was happening, or if things were truly more intense than the first house. I used to have to sleep with a lava lamp on, as all through the night, not just when I was crying. The silhouettes would now gather in numbers, dance all around my room, and whisper my name, almost urging me to reply. I remember even replying with a simple hello, but the whispers would just get louder and more intense, and I would have to sleep in my parents' room, where I was left alone by the silhouettes. The silhouettes would also almost start being more of a solid. I remember I would often feel the weight of them sitting on my bed, which was truly terrifying. One night specifically, I awoke to someone sitting on the end of my bed. It was the early hours of the morning, dark outside, and my dad was sitting on the end of my bed, fully clothed, just looking at me. I remember specifically being weirded out by the fact that he was fully clothed when he should have been sleeping. I asked him, "Dad?" And he gave me his trademark smile and a wave, but didn't say anything. I reached over to touch him, and he immediately disappeared as I touched him, and the weight lifted off my bed. I don't think I touched him, or if I did, I didn't feel anything. As I said, this continued until we finally got me a new wardrobe, out of pure luck, just needing a new one. In the second house, the haunting specifically only happened in my room. Unfortunately, or fortunately, I've had a lot more paranormal experiences in my life since then. It probably doesn't seem like too much to hear, but living through it as a young child was absolutely terrifying. And still to this day, I don't sleep a wink the first night I'm sleeping somewhere, hotels included. I would love to know if anyone has any insight into what the silhouettes were. My theory is that they traveled with the wardrobe due to them stopping when we got rid of it. But does anyone have any other theories? I would love to hear them all. 3. Some quick backstory. I'm a lightning rod for weirdness, and have been my entire adult life. I've encountered things that I genuinely can't explain and have tried successfully to debunk on my own. And now in 2021, 2 loved ones have reached out from the grave to contact me. It started with Tori. Tori was once my supervisor when I was still working security for a living. She was one of the smartest and all-around capable people I have ever known. So damn funny, too. In fact, I would often say that if the zombie apocalypse ever happened, I would try to be in whatever band of survivors she would undoubtedly lead. And like me, she was also a trans woman, and I considered her to be more of a mother to me than my own mother during that time. There were 4 transgender security officers there, including myself. She kept me safe more than once, and offered me life advice I have taken to heart. In truth, I often called her my work mom, so it was a terrible shock when I discovered she had suddenly passed away. But I'm getting ahead of myself. It's the end of 2020. I'm freshly engaged to the love of my life, and I'm winding down at the end of my latest shift working janitorial. I'm on my phone checking Audible, and I'm recommended Ron Perlman's autobiography, which I instantly nab and download. Don't worry, this plays in later. While it's downloading, I check Facebook, and I find a post from Tori's account that was posted by her now widow. She had suddenly passed away at home just 2 days before my fiancé and I publicly announced our engagement. I was understandably instantly distraught. I'm not sure exactly how long it took afterwards, but strange coincidences began to happen over the course of the next few days. Specifically, I became inundated with personal accounts of people who had lost loved ones, and how they dealt with that loss. And I'm not talking about people sharing their stories with me to try to help me cope and heal. I'm talking about being ambushed by these accounts while trying to get my mind off her death by media I was using to get my mind off her death. Case in point, Ron Perlman's autobiography. If you aren't aware of it, his autobiography literally opens with him getting the news that his dad suddenly passed away, and goes into depth about the aftermath. That was the first instance, and it didn't stop. I'd be watching YouTube videos, and would get hit with one anecdote after another. Hell, I even walked out of my bedroom one evening to a YouTube video my housemates were watching that included an anecdote about someone's friend who was dying of cancer. I just couldn't escape it. Eventually, I just laughed to myself and went, is Tori trying to mom me from beyond the grave? Which was moments before the part in Ron Perlman's autobiography where his father started visiting him in his dreams for a year. I have never had a capital S sign before, but in that moment, oh fuck did it feel like a sign. I was shaken to say the least. I've been an agnostic my entire adult life, and to have something akin to a personal confirmation of an afterlife was, well, it was kind of big. Not only that, but the one person I would have figured who was smart, capable, and adaptable enough to have the afterlife already figured out, had seemingly done just that. And from what I could tell, she had been trying to get me to healthily deal with my grief over her death. Because of fucking course she would, Tori. At first I didn't know what to do. But what I decided upon was to tell her widow that I thought Tori had reached out to me from the beyond. I told her everything I've told you, and no sooner had I done so, the coincidences stopped altogether. I'm not sure if that was part of her intention, for me to maybe help give her widow some closure. All I know is that she stopped reaching out after that, and I was left to mourn and process my grief. Fast forward to February. It's the 22nd, and I've woke up to my younger sibling in tears. Our sole remaining grandma has passed away suddenly in the assisted living facility she had been moved into not 2 weeks previously. I take the night off work to grieve, and at sunrise the following morning I quietly say goodbye to my grandma on our balcony. After I said all I needed to say, I made a quiet addition to Tori, that if it was in her power, could she help get my grandma acclimated to the afterlife? And maybe explain me being transgender to her. And if she could, I would be eternally thankful. Not long after, my grandma started visiting me in my dreams, and I think I have Tori to be eternally thankful for that. 4. So in my hometown in the middle of the Midwest, there is this gas station. It's on a fairly well-used road, and it's in the middle of a town a short walk from the local airport. On the opposite end is a hotel that has changed many hands over the years, but it has had a very boring history since it was built. However, the field next to the hotel is a location of interest. It's fairly large and has pretty tall grass growing. Since the day that the hotel was built, there have been stories coming from people staying on the side of the hotel closest to the field, reporting fairly unusual sounds, like scratching on windows or gasping from the outside. Weird is the apparition seen in the field. Personally, I didn't know any of this until recently. I'll get to that later. My first encounter was at the new Casey's General Store. Like I said, the gas station is right across and has never had activity. But the field is within sight, so it's easy to spot something. I visit this gas station frequently on the way to work, so I've seen quite a bit. I think the first time I saw something, I saw a fairly short, kind of fat-looking man, I assume just about 50 feet in. His shoulders just above the grass's highest point. Problem is, looking right at them, they disappear, so as far as I know, it was a tall kid. Next time there were three, a woman in a dress, a man with a ball cap, and a man in a uniform. But as I'm waiting for my gas to fill up, I realize they vanish. Looking up from the pump, I see a man across from me. He's looking focused at the field. I got to say, I said the creepiest thing I could at that moment. They don't like it when you look right at them. He looked at me, clearly hadn't realized I was there. He looked horrified. But after explaining, he said he thought he'd been going crazy because he worked at the hotel and had seen them frequently, but never a good look. Apparently, he got frequent complaints about customers having people peeping through their windows, and when he, the security guard, went to investigate, he'd find nothing. Not even footprints. But he'd find figures out of the corner of his eye while looking. We talked for a bit, seeing if he knew any history. He knew as much as I did, which was zip. City Records says the field's never been used, and before the hotel, there was nothing in that plot for about 70 years back. Thought it was weird, but I think things are starting to spill over to the gas station. Talking to an attendant that I've become friendly with, she said that she'd seen people by the pumps out of the corner of her eyes. Then today I drove up, there was some kind of workman's truck sitting away from the pumps. From the cabin I could see a person. I didn't look directly at them. I could tell they were looking at me, but I didn't even really register they were there completely. When I came out, there was a police officer standing writing something on a form. I'm a good guy and was worried this cop was going to give the guy a ticket for legally parking there. The cops are pretty ticket happy. I go up, the figure is gone now, and say, "Hey man, the guy just walked inside. Besides, it's legal to park there." The cop looked at me confused, saying, "You said the owner is here?" I nodded. "Well, that's not possible." "What do you mean?" He pointed a little ways away, a weird red stain in the soaked concrete. "The driver was involved in a hit and run. Just died last night at the hospital." Post this revelation, I realized what was sort of going on. Whether it's actually connected to the field or not isn't the point. But something weird I remember is how the figure was sitting completely facing the car towards me and turning his whole body as he watched me. The cop ended up searching for a break-in, but found nothing. In fact, the keys were locked inside the truck and they'd have to tow it. 5. My grandma's house is really creepy. They lived in a big house in the middle of nowhere mountains of Romania. Not another house for miles, surrounded by forest. As cool as it is, being probably 100 or so years old, and being pretty big with 5 bedrooms and 2 living rooms, the house itself is just creepy when you're there alone. No matter where you are in the house, you'll occasionally hear weird noises, and multiple times me and my brother have both heard voices during long silences. The creepiest things that have happened there were mostly during the night I slept alone there. When I was 14, I went to babysit my grandma's dog while they were away for the weekend. I was going to stay for a night by the sea. This was going to be the first time I spent the night at their house alone. I'll list some of the creepy things that happened, and although I don't really believe in ghosts, it certainly feels like the house is haunted. Just before it got dark, I was watching a movie in one of the living rooms with the smaller TV, because it was connected to the VHS player and I didn't feel like moving it. And while watching, I got chills out of nowhere. It wouldn't have been strange normally, but the dog, Anton, lifted his head like he had heard something as soon as I got the chills. Anton looked around for a second and laid his head back down. Later I had to take Anton to go potty, and because I was too lazy to take him out earlier, I had to do it in the dark. He peed a few meters into the woods, and as we were headed back, he stopped randomly and turned around. He sat there staring into nothing, and let out a few weak growls. He didn't want to budge, so I tried turning his head back towards the house, and then he got really uptight and started barking at the darkness, hair sticking up on his back. But when I shined the flashlight in the direction he was barking, there was nothing. Which you can also thank the crappy flashlight for. I figured it was some animal or something, and just started tugging him back with his leash towards the house. He then lunged in the direction he was barking, like the animal was just right there and he was going to kill it. But before I could even react, he started yelping like he was being seriously hurt, tail between his legs and frantically backing up in submission. When he got back to me, he stood in front of me, still looking at nothing and growling. But looking at it with the flashlight and all, there was just a tree. It really freaked me out, and just rushed him back in the house. Later I made macaroni before bed, and while eating I heard a loud thumping noise from the dining room. Anton was sitting by me, and of course got angry and leapt off the couch and ran into the dining room. I followed him and saw that one chair was pulled away from the table like someone was sitting in it, and another knocked over. Not how I remembered it. Anton sniffed around and went back to the couch. I fixed the chairs and went back with him. Laying in bed, I started to fall asleep, when Anton woke up with a jerk and accidentally kicked me in the back. Barely awake, I just told him shh, and tried to fall asleep again. But I heard a faint voice say, "No, Andre, they are jungs," and Andre is my name. I got the chills right then and felt completely awake and on edge. Anton growled lightly, and I sat up and looked around the room. I eventually calmed down and fell back asleep. I woke up one more time that night, not a dream or noise or anything. But I opened my eyes and my heart was racing, and I felt really scared. Anton was pacing around, and I sat up again, not at all feeling tired, but once again saw nothing. Anton hopped back up and laid down. It felt like out of nowhere. I was way too sleepy to be awake again, and went back to sleep. For some reason, I didn't wake up until 12 the next day, when my grandparents had already come back home, despite me going to bed at 11. That's a whole 13 hours of sleep. Finally, I got to go home, and after telling my parents and grandparents what happened, they just told me Anton was seeing things. But that doesn't explain why he was yelping like he was being seriously hurt. But nothing creepy has happened there since. And whenever you're there with people, it feels like a really cool old building. But when you're there alone, you have this weird feeling that something is off. You feel extremely lonely. My grandma says that she got that feeling too after my parents and aunts and uncles all moved out, and my grandpa was away at work. And she told me about a time when she was eating dinner alone one night, and she heard a door slam loudly and violently in the hallway. And surely enough, when she went to go check the hallway, the closet door was closed that she had left open earlier. She openly believes the house is haunted. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 5 True Paranormal Stories, episode 232. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. If you liked the video, then please do boop the like button and leave a comment, and if you haven't done so already, I would appreciate it if you clicked subscribe. That way you'll get my videos in your subscriptions feed, and hit the notification bell if you want to be notified when I upload a new video. It's every day, but you'll get a notification once a day, in theory. We also have a little shout out to do today. Thank you very much to the author of story number 2, that's Reddit user Dietetic. Thank you very much for allowing us to use your story dietetic. Okay, for the next, say, couple of weeks, I'm going to dial back on the impromptu streams, and I'll just do the Saturday stream, just so I can concentrate on some other bits and bobs that need my attention. I'm also not sure if they're helping or hurting the channel in any way. People seem to enjoy them, but I don't know what the ultimate effect on the channel is. Okay, and with that, I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.